So, Zack Snyder remains in the headlines. He's been in the headlines for a few weeks now. So, Zack Snyder shares new Ben Affleck Batman Dark Knight image. So there is speculation, and it is fairly rampant speculation, that we will be seeing the return of Zack Snyder to DC in some capacity, format, which could happen, and there could be a few ways that happens. I've put forward the idea that the way he gets back into DC is that if Netflix acquires Warner Brothers, or Warner Brothers merges with Netflix, whatever the deal is, but if the Warner Brothers Netflix deal does go through, I believe that's probably Snyder's best way back in. But there's a few ways that it could happen. So, Zack Snyder has shared another striking image of Ben Affleck as Batman, this time emphasising the cinematic craftsmanship behind the shot and noting he's the Dark Knight. It is a cool image. Let's just admire this image for a second. That is quite a cool image. It's reminding me of the iconic shot of Christian Bale's Batman in The Dark Knight, standing over the rubble, looking down, and standing over the rubble of when Rachel is tied up in the warehouse, and the warehouse blows up. It's giving off those vibes. Posting the black and white image to Instagram, Snyder wrote, "Wide lens, Dark Knight. Leica MD, 28mm, f1 7.7. Sorry if I butchered the filmmaking terminology, the camera terminology there. The photo captures Affleck's Batman emerging through smoke on set, framed with a wide lens that amplifies scale and atmosphere. A visual style Snyder frequently used throughout Batman v Superman and Justice League. Snyder's Batman and The Dark Knight Returns. The timing of the post has again fueled speculation about Snyder's future with the character. We've been told that if Netflix does end up acquiring Warner Brothers Discovery, Snyder could finally move forward with a live-action adaptation of The Dark Knight Returns, a project he has long said he wants to make comic accurate. Yeah, that's what he's after. If he returns, if Snyder returns to DC, he wants The Dark Knight Returns, and he wants to do it comic accurate, and he wants it bloody and gritty and dark, and I'm all for that, to be honest. I'm all for that, though I also think we should let Matt Reeves and Robert Pattinson have their trilogy. I also think we should do that, because I'm very excited for the Batman Part 2, and so are most DC fans. Big fan of that first one. Didn't think I was going to like that first one. I was very sceptical. Didn't like the choice of Robert Pattinson as Batman. Didn't like the way he looked, and I was very sceptical about that movie. And I was very pleasantly surprised. So, yeah, I think we should let Matt Reeves and Robert Pattinson have their trilogy, get their trilogy out of the way. According to our sources, Snyder's preferred Batman for that story remains Ben Affleck, who would be willing to return under the right circumstances. I think Ben Affleck does make a good Dark Knight Returns Batman. He definitely does. Paramount outcome could bring full Snyderverse return. Meanwhile, if Paramount ends up winning the battle for Warner Brothers Discovery instead of Netflix, we're told the Snyderverse could be back in full play, not just a standalone Batman project. Our insiders recently filled us in that Zack has new ideas for the Justice League sequels, which would also bring back Henry Cavill as Superman, Gal Gadot as Wonder Woman, and Jason Momoa as Aquaman. This is crazy, bro. This is crazy that we're actually, genuinely considering this in 2026. This is wild. Snyder's recent wave of DCEU image drops, including Superman, Wonder Woman, Aquaman, Flash, Cyborg, Steppenwolf, and now multiple Batman posts, is said to be part of an effort to gauge fan response and engagement. So far, the response has been loud. Yeah, Snyder's got a big fan base. He's got a very big fan base. There's a lot of Snyder bros. a lot of fucking Snyder bros out there, man. And he's got a large fan base. I mean, there are people who really love Man of Steel and BVS and his cut of Justice League, the Snyder cut of Justice League. There are some super fans of those films, and he's got a huge fan base. And I think his public stock with his reputation with DC fans currently is probably higher than James Gunn's. Maybe not. Maybe I'm wrong. But maybe I'm not wrong. And James Gunn's contract runs out in 2027, I believe. Because I believe he's been given a 5-year contract, something like that. Something like a 5-year contract. And I believe it expires in 2027. Now, obviously, he's got all these grand plans. And if the universe ends up being a giant success, that contract will get renewed for another 5 years or whatever. But, Superman didn't actually make money. Superman broke even. Supergirl's not going to do better. Supergirl's going to do the same, or it's going to do worse. And if it does worse, then it will actually lose money. Clayface is a grey zone, a grey area. I think Clayface is a giant grey area. And then there's going to be Man of Tomorrow, which is a Superman 2. Probably not a $1 billion movie. I mean, given the first movie barely broke even, I don't see that there's any reason to assume that Man of Tomorrow is going to be a giant hit. And I don't think... And when I mean a giant hit, I do mean over $1 billion, because we have to remember that these days, all of these movies cost 200, 250, sometimes 300 million. So when I say a huge hit, I mean 1.5 billion. Because if you're spending 250 M's to make a movie, you're then going to spend that amount of money, so 250 M's, you're then going to spend that on marketing, promoting, advertising. That's 500 million. So you would want a movie with those kinds of costs to make $1 billion. You'd want that to make $1 billion. You'd need to make 500 to get your money back, and then you would want to make $1 billion, wouldn't you? if your movie costs $250 million and then you have to spend that again on promoting and marketing and advertising, you want to make $1 billion. That's the thing. So James Gunn's contract expires in 2027. The Warner Brothers Netflix deal would be finalising next year in 2027, summer 2027. It could end up going the other way, and it could end up going towards the direction of Paramount. But I think the timings would still line up the same. So who knows what's going to happen? Are we going to have two competing cinematic universes at the same time? Are we going to have someone taking somebody else's job? Are we going to have two guys competing for the top job? And it's just going to be a matter of who can win bigger at the box office, and who can get more bums on seats, that sort of thing. Who knows, man? Who knows? Who knows? So, yeah. That's all I wanted to cover for today. So, yeah. See you later.